What I am holding here in my hands is a facsimile copy of the handwritten manuscript of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and I am holding it while sitting in Geneva, Switzerland, the place where Mary first put pen to paper and started writing this book. Mary Shelley, Mary Godwin at the time, sat down and wrote these words on this first page of the manuscript, only about a mile and 200 years away from where I am right now. Being able to see the handwriting, the words on the page, and seeing some of the creative process behind this novel that I love so much is a very powerful thing for me. I honestly teared up a little bit the first time I held this manuscript and looked at these pages. It feels incredibly intimate to be able to see the points at which her handwriting gets messy and splotchy, and the sections or the entire pages sometimes that are crossed through. I look at these sections and these parts of the manuscript and I can imagine the hand moving across the page. I can picture the person behind the creation. Part of what makes the novel Frankenstein so compelling to me has always been that not only is the plot so focused on creation, the desire for creation and the consequences of invention, but the novel was also born of this really fascinating story of creative impulse and inspiration. Within the plot of Frankenstein, we have this story of a young man who is far from home, who is mourning his mother, who becomes completely obsessed with a single idea and drives himself to the point of illness and insanity in the pursuit of it. And then, of course, we also get the story of a creature who is alone in the world, who has to make sense of his identity and his origins after having been abandoned by a creator who hates him. Oftentimes when I think about this novel, I hold the plot, the story of it, in mind directly next to my understanding of the origins of the novel, how this story came into existence, and also the origins of its author. Mary Shelley's mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, was a fascinating woman. She was an author of, among other things, a controversial proto-feminist book called A Vindication of the Rights of Women, in which she was advocating for the right of women to education and to equal opportunity. And tragically, Mary Wollstonecraft died very soon after giving birth to Mary Godwin at the time, later Mary Shelley. And that meant that Mary, our author of Frankenstein, grew up mourning a mother that she had never known and learning about who her mother was by reading her writing and becoming aware of her legacy. Not only was Mary's experience of being a daughter one marked by loss, but her early experiences of being a mother were also quite significantly marked by tragedy. When Mary was quite young, she met the poet Percy Shelley, and they fell in love and ran away to be together. She was 16 years old. He was 21 years old. He was married with one child already and another on the way. Very soon into Mary and Percy's relationship, she became pregnant. That first child was born prematurely and died very shortly after. And Mary describes just 2 weeks after her child's death how she had this dream that she was able to revive her daughter from death, only then to wake up and return to the harsh reality. When she was 18 years old and she and Percy were still not yet married, they had another child, this time a son named William, who did survive through his childhood. And this was the child who she was nursing in the summer of 1816 when she and Percy and her sister Claire Claremont went on their travels that took them here to Geneva, Switzerland, where they met up with Lord Byron and his traveling doctor, John Polidori. This is how Mary Shelley describes that summer in her preface to the 1831 edition of Frankenstein. She says, "It proved a wet, ungenial summer, and incessant rain often confined us for days to the house. Some volumes of ghost stories, translated from the German into French, fell into our hands." She goes on to describe the plots of some of those ghost stories that captured her and her companion's attention before relaying the story of a night on which, "We will each write a ghost story," said Lord Byron, and his proposition was acceded to. She describes having basically writer's block. She says, "I busied myself to think of a story to rival those which had excited us to this task, one which would speak to the mysterious fears of our nature and awaken thrilling horror, one to make the reader dread to look around, to curdle the blood, and quicken the beatings of the heart." Day after day, her companions ask her if she has had an idea yet, and day after day she has to tell them no, until finally, one night, the witching hour had gone by before we retired to rest. When I placed my head on my pillow, I did not sleep, nor could I be said to think. My imagination, unbidden, possessed and guided me, gifting the successive images that arose in my mind with a vividness far beyond the usual bounds of reverie. I saw with shut eyes but acute mental vision. I saw the pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together. I saw the hideous phantasm of a man stretched out, and then on the working of some powerful engine, show signs of life and stir with an uneasy, half-vital motion. Frightful it must be, for supremely frightful would be the effect of any human endeavor to mock the stupendous mechanism of the creator of the world. His success would terrify the artist. He would rush away from his odious handiwork, horror-stricken. He would hope that, left to itself, the slight spark of life which he had communicated would fade, that this thing which had received such imperfect animation would subside into dead matter, and he might sleep in the belief that the silence of the grave would quench forever the transient existence of the hideous corpse which he had looked upon as the cradle of life. He sleeps, but he is awakened. He opens his eyes. Behold, the horrid thing stands at his bedside, opening his curtains and looking on him with yellow, watery, but speculative eyes. When she woke up the very next morning, she began to write this manuscript. Part of what is so striking to me every time I sit down with this manuscript is just how messy it is. Messy not only in terms of how loopy and seemingly frantic the writing gets at some points, but in terms of how crowded the margins are. There are all these little details throughout that are so charming to me and that I find so touching. There's one repeated doodle that pops up in the margins over and over again. I don't even know what it's supposed to be. Maybe it's a cloud, maybe it's a tree, maybe it's just some little shape that Mary or somebody else was fond of scrawling on any scrap of paper that was nearby. Here and there, you will also find these lines of sums. Somebody was doing addition in the margins of the manuscript. I have no idea what they were for. I don't know why Mary would have been doing this, or if it was even her doing the math in the margins at all. I can't tell if it was her handwriting. I can, though, sometimes make out when the handwriting is distinctly not hers, when it is instead Percy Shelley's. Percy was acting as something of an editor throughout her process of writing this novel. And frequently throughout the manuscript, you can find these moments where he is making changes or additions and suggestions to what she has written. I love just to sit with this novel and flip through it. I can't read her handwriting clearly enough that I could actually read the novel in full through the manuscript, but I find it so fun to search through the pages for some of my favorite parts of the story. Parts like that moment of creation that came to Mary in a dream, or the moment when Frankenstein and the creature speak to each other for the first time, or when the creature talks about how much he loved reading Paradise Lost. Like I said, it just feels so intimate to be able to read these pages, and it sparks my imagination so much to look for traces of inspiration and thought process and revision in the manuscript. And to be able to sit with it in Geneva, in the place where inspiration came to Mary Shelley, where she began writing what would become one of my favorite pieces of literature in the English canon, is so special, so meaningful to me. And I hope that seeing her handwriting and her process on these pages has some meaning to you as well.